from an equity, and social justice lens. In a nutshell, that's what it is. So transformative SEL argues that we are, as noted here on the slide, that we're teaching students to examine injustices that may come up, that will undoubtedly come up, and also to collaboratively find solutions for those personal, community, and societal injustices. So it's an equity and social justice frame. Brown girl dreaming. Thank you, Rebecca. I'm going to write that down.
That's a Jacqueline Woodson one as well.
Oh.
Right, Rebecca?
What was the name?
Jacqueline Woodson.
Thank you. I'm always up for reading. I'm like one of those people who like actually reads research. Yeah, I don't know. Sometimes I wonder about me, but I appreciate it. Thank you. So yeah, so I want to just link this back to like those CASEL competencies. And you know what? I probably will even go back because we just spent time talking about like self-awareness and self-management. But if you don't take time to understand that like a student and really like a person, a human's sense of confidence, their whether or not they see themselves as bringing assets, whether or not they have positive personal and social identities, whether they're able to manage stress in their lives. All of that is impacted by like life outside of school. And students, and again, people's identities don't like stop at like our doorway at school, that they have identities outside of school that they may witness or hear about social injustices, racial violence, that like all those things impact you as a person. And again, our students here. So without knowing and understanding that, then these ideas, right, of competency, being self-aware, self-management, making decisions, social awareness, having that empathy for somebody who is different than you, who has different experiences, those relationship skills, they're not really going to tell the whole story. And so that's where transformative SEL comes in. If you're interested in reading more, I linked here. Doesn't look like we're going to have, yeah, probably not. Probably won't go into much of here, but I linked the CASEL information that they have on transformative SEL. But I just mentioned like this is fairly new, even for them. And so they've been trying to do research on best practices, strategies, implementation of transformative SEL. So what they have is here, I'm going to probably point out one thing because I read it and I really liked it, y'all. And actually they have like a little, does that zoom in for you guys when I zoom in like this? Is that zooming in? No, someone said yes, someone said no. Oh, okay.
Read it. Yeah, it's fine.
No, yeah, no worries. It's not. I can zoom in like this too. I was zooming in a different way. So on the right side over here, I'll zoom in even more. They have like they link the actual article if anybody likes reading articles like I do. But like as a summary, they published this like some findings that they recently did with a school So they've been studying different schools that have been collaborating them on implementing some of these things. And I really like, even if you just take a look at that graphic of like some of the like highlights. And so they, like principle number 1, they're encouraging everybody to center students' lived experiences and their identity and SEL instruction. Again, because those identities aren't confined to your classroom. Like there's a lot to it. So ensure representation in all curricular areas, encourage conversations, be flexible enough to just say, you know what, this isn't working, something else is going on in our lives, and we need to just stop and address something else first, potentially. Principle 2, use SEL discussions to validate student experiences of oppression, create the space to do that, infuse social justice issues. Principle 3, encourage youth to use their voice for social justice. Again, like relaying the tools necessary for students to like be those social change agents that they already are. But again, so like those kinds of things they've been gleaning from their research so far. But again, it's still fairly new, y'all. But if anybody's interested, it's linked on there. But again, just to get it away from like very theoretical things that like are still kind of being researched and understood, I'm going to make the pitch, which you are welcomed and invited to. But please feel free to share if there are other resources that you have. But I would probably invite you all to think of using the social justice standards from Learning for Justice as a framework to think through transformative SEL. If you're not familiar with Learning for Justice, they put out a lot of different resources for educators that center around social justice. One of those being social justice standards, which they use as a framework for anti-bias education. And so they use the infographic on the right. Sylvia Duckworth, I think, actually made it. Yeah, she's on the left, I'm on the right. But the actual information, like the content from it, I actually think I have a book, is from a book on anti-bias education. And so this book came out, and then they meaning Learning for Justice, created the standards to address those 4 goals of anti-bias education. And those 4 goals are directly linked to the 4 domains of their standards. So the first one being identity. If you look at the graphic, that's number 1. Again, like helping students to create that positive sense of their identity. 2, diversity. In the graphic, it's embrace differences. 3, justice, so being able to name and identify both justice and injustice in the standards. Bias, prejudice included. And then 4, being action. So, right, once we have positive social identities and personal identities, and we have knowledge and language to describe diversity and justice, then we take all of that and we put it into action. Which is why I say, like, I really like the social justice standards as a more concrete way for me as a teacher to have something to work toward. So if you're interested, yeah, I link the actual standards, and they're by grade span. So again, regardless of whether you're, the anchor standards are first, but regardless of whether you're kindergarten teacher, so it starts with K2, or a high school teacher, like they have made grade level outcomes for all of those 4 domains, which again, link very, very well, hint, hint, to those SEL competencies. So they're linked on there if you're interested. And we're getting pretty close to the end. We're probably going to take a few more minutes here, but again, we'll see how much time we have. Just to make some, again, just to like help us try to brainstorm and like think through, like, yes, there, like we can talk about the SEL competencies and then transformative SEL and even the social justice standards, but like, what does that look like day to day in your classroom on the ground? I put up some ideas for you on like starting to think this through, and I organize them by domain. So if you're working on developing students' sense of identity and those identity standards, then something like Flipgrid is invaluable if you're unfamiliar with Flipgrid. I linked, each of these images is linked. And so you can definitely do some more investigating there. You're welcome to reach out to me too. If you're curious about any one of these tools and you don't have very much experience with it. But, you know, in a very simple example, you could use Flipgrid to ensure that students' names are pronounced correctly. You know, they put out a blog post a while ago just on that and how important and like how much our sense of identity goes into our name. And I'm sure we all have stories about our name. Trust me, with the name like Celia, I have stories too. But it definitely has, it's tied to our sense of identity. And so something like that isn't really about the tool, nor is it about any one of these tech tools. It's really about what you're doing with it. If you're unfamiliar with Class Dojo there in the middle, again, these are linked if you're curious, but Class Dojo puts out a video series. They put out this series where they use these characters, which are awesome. And I've taught up all the way up to middle school. I would still use this in middle school. I will leave it up to any high school teacher whether or not they would. I would definitely use this with my middle schoolers. But they have all these different big ideas, as they call them, and they use the characters to show how they're feeling, what they're doing, how they react to all these circumstances that the characters are going through. But again, using something like that can foster a sense of like growth mindset, I think, yeah, is one of the topics that they talk about, right? And so I would, when I was still in the classroom, I would play one of these, they're fairly short videos, and have like a quick discussion, journal write down 3 words, like something super quick in the morning as like a check-in. So again, just to get an idea, Khan Academy is very similar. Again, if you click on this, you're going to get to the page for LearnStorm. If you're unfamiliar with LearnStorm, they have a bunch of different lessons, but I added it on because to me, it reads. So there are like lessons on like growth mindset, very similar to Class Dojo, but they're much more like secondary lessons. They're much more like text heavy and like they're not in like this kind of cartoon format, so to speak. And so if anybody's in secondary and you're like, I don't know how I feel about Class Dojo, then I would recommend looking at this. For the diversity standards, you know, Flipgrid has this feature where you can be grid pals with other folks. So again, if you're unfamiliar with Flipgrid and grid pals, I linked, but it's essentially a way to connect with other classrooms outside of your own. And so again, if we're thinking about how to bring in discussions and conversations about diversity, that could be a way. anybody's unfamiliar with Pear Deck, they put out a template pack for some SEL skills. And so I'll zoom in. You can get the slides for their template here. Again, feel free to reach out if you're not sure how to use Pear Deck in and of itself, but they incorporate some of these SEL things in some of their slides that you can use in your lessons. So you can do like check-ins with students to see how they're feeling. And they can like drag and drop, they can describe, they can offer a different perspective, which is an SEL competency, right? A just perspective that's different from themselves, like take somebody else's point of view. And so a bunch of different templates on there, which are linked on there as well. This last idea, the only thing that's linked is Skype, not so much because we all need Skype. I don't even know anybody who like district-wide would use Skype, not around here anyway. But really just taking the idea of mystery Skype. Doesn't have to be Skype, but it can be any video conferencing tool that you have. But if you're unfamiliar with mystery Skype, I linked an article from ISTE describing what it is. But again, it's just a way to connect different classrooms from different places. And there's some people use like an actual like protocol, and but again, if you're curious about that, it's linked on there. If anybody's unfamiliar with the SDGs, I would recommend that you look into that in terms of like thinking about some of the justice standards. The SDGs are also known as the global goals. And the global goals are these goals here, what I've done in the past is we study a little bit about what the goals mean, like no poverty, zero hunger, right? All these global goals. And then I've had students work on like researching one of the goals that they think is most important to address worldwide. Like which one of these do you think is the most unjust? Which one of these do you want to learn more about? Which one do you think is most important to work toward? And so again, I just use that as a way to anchor students a little bit. And lastly, for action, both common sense, which is the first linked icon here, and Google's Be Internet Awesome curriculum have lessons in terms of digital citizenship for them, but again, the translation there is very easy. But they have lessons on like how to be an upstander, which again is like taking action when you see that something's wrong. If there's prejudice or bias or something that is unjust, then students know how to step up and be an upstander, so to speak. So that's why I linked those first two, and especially, not exclusively, if you're in secondary and you haven't heard of the 2010 project, I definitely would recommend that you all look at that. The 2010 project is just, it's a way of students having time to investigate their own passions. So whatever it is that they feel like they need to take action on, it's a guided project that they do where they investigate something in their community, but then they create kind of like an action project in their community. But it's very much student-centered and they get to pick the direction that it goes in. But again, with the intent of like having all this learning result in some kind of action in the community. Where did the time go, everybody? Like, I just looked at the clock and I'm like, wait, what? Sorry, I'm like thinking in my head. Okay, so last but not least, we're going to I'm going to quickly run through these resources. In case these resources, I think I would probably say, like, if you're interested in thinking through like some more things that you can bring into your classroom, you can look at these resources on this page, anywhere from like using GIFs to help students regulate their breathing, or like using, I have these like, both Yoga Pretzels and Mindful Kids are like these task cards, or like if you don't have kind of the background yourself and like doing mindfulness or yoga and you want something to like help bring those into your classroom, you could look at some of those resources. I know that some of you all know that I'm a registered yoga teacher, and so if anybody's interested in some yoga resources, I would highly recommend Yoga Ed on YouTube. They put out and publish videos specific to like not just age group, so like they have like from kinder all the way to like teens, but they also focus their videos by like topics. So it might be like yoga for stress reduction, yoga to focus. So I love their work. So definitely look into that if you're interested. And the second page of resources is more for you all, meaning like, you know, as we get ready to close it out, I often feel like we need to think of SEL again in like a larger context. And sometimes like, you know, school, federal, state, local policies don't really help us in like our own social and emotional needs. And so the very first resource is like thinking through like, well, what kinds of systems can you have in place school-wide to tackle some of these things? At the same time, followed up with the next resources being that, you know, I often hear teachers expressing like a lot of like stress and overwhelm, like some folks did at the beginning. And if anything, this serves as a reminder to make sure that everybody's taking care of themselves too, that students learn from us as well as the teacher. So if I can't manage my own stress and anxiety and overwhelm, the students will feel that from me. And like, I'm also modeling being able to identify when I'm having a bad day, because I totally did that to my kids. I'm feeling sick, something's wrong, I'm having an off day. This is what I'm going to be like, but know that this is why. So again, just a reminder to make sure you take care of yourselves. If anybody's interested in thinking through the social justice standards, the third presentation is one that I made for, I think it was for Spring Q. It might have been for Spring Q, where I go a little bit more in depth into the social justice standards if you're interested in those specifically. And a toolkit again for like adult SEL, which is equally as important as the SEL for our students. That being said, I'm probably going to stop talking now. I know there's still a little bit of time left, but I would rather just pause for right now. So if anybody has any questions, comments, concerns, again, you're definitely welcome to drop them in the chat or unmute. Otherwise, thanks everybody for joining us. and Monterey Bay Q. There's one more day tomorrow, right, Krista?
I think so. Then we're back, huh? I think our district goes back the 5th, so we got a little more time, but
Oh, okay. Yeah.
thinking of
It's a
you
little
guys
bit
on
different.
Monday.
But yeah, thank you everybody for joining us. Make sure you take care. And I'll make sure I stick around for a little bit of time right now.
Thank you all for coming.
Yes.
That was awesome. So many great resources. I'm excited. I was bookmarking like crazy.
Yeah, I mean, there's definitely a lot to it, but I think that's why, like, sometimes, I mean, I'm telling you, it's like I could go on, and I'm telling you, someone decided to hand me the mic that I could talk about this for all. It's very complex. It's like you can't just, like, it's not as simple. Like we can,
Yeah.
like one teacher can be working on all of these important skills, but like, is it really sustainable if it's just one teacher at one school
Right.
that's then like faced with like all these like policies that like go against? I'm just like, what?
Absolutely.
Yeah, it's complex.
It is. And we get a lot of pushback, like, well, I don't have time to do this, and Nicole is here. Nicole's a friend and colleague of mine, and we've been doing some work on SEL and literature. And that's our big concern, how do we convince teachers that this is so important, especially this year, I think.
Yeah, in like a whole new way. I feel like it's always been important, but like now it's just like,
Yeah. All right, so for those of you that are still here, if you have questions, I'm going to stop recording now so you can ask them.